The next thing that we see Peter mentions, he says, Jesus is the holy and righteous one. Notice this. He says, Jesus is the holy and righteous one. Go ahead and go to that next one. He says, you denied, he's really highlighting this courageous speech. You denied the holy and righteous one and asked for a murderer to be granted to you. So at this feast that was going on around the time Jesus died, Pilate, this ruler, would give the people, they would kind of vote and say, who do you want released? He would have prisoners, and he would say, I'll release one prisoner for you. So who do you want? And he says, do you want Jesus, who we find no guilt, who we find no sin in, or do you want this guy Barabbas? And Barabbas was a murderer, and he was a thief, and he led kind of something that tried to overthrow the government. So really bad guy, right? Think like Gandhi versus Timothy McVeigh. That kind of thing. It's like super nice, super kind, loving, and then this dude who kills a lot of people. It's like, who do you want? And because they did not want Jesus to live, they wanted to kill Jesus because he threatened their control, they said, we want Barabbas. Give us Barabbas. And so Jesus is condemned and Barabbas goes free. That's what he's talking about when he says, you wanted a murderer to be granted to you. How many does Peter say are holy and righteous? How many? Just read the text. Anybody? One. He doesn't say a holy and righteous one. He says, you killed, you denied the holy and righteous one. May I submit to you that we in the Western culture, we don't really understand how evil we are. We don't really understand the consequence of what it means to rebel against the holy God. We just think, I'm a pretty good person. I pay my taxes, mostly. I don't speed too bad. I've never killed anyone. I don't commit adultery. I don't do all these things. And we think, yeah, I'm a pretty good person. What we don't realize is that the law of God demands us to live a certain way and be a certain way because that's how God has created us to live. And we have all rebelled against how God has told us to live. What he's told us is right, how he created us to live. So I want to read for you real quick something that many of you have read before. And this is the Apostle Paul in Romans chapter 3. He's saying, this is the status of every human being that's ever lived. He's quoting Old Testament, and he's piecing it all together, and he's saying, okay, this is the summary of where you stand and where I stand. He says, what's the first word? None. None is righteous. No, not one. No one understands. No one seeks for God. All have turned aside. Together they have become worthless. No one does good, not even one. Their throat is an open grave. They use their tongues to deceive. The venom of asps is under their lips. Their mouth is full of curses and bitterness. Their feet are swift to shed blood. And their paths are ruin and misery, and the way of peace they have not known. There is no fear of God before their eyes. Just kind of gulp right there, right? It's like, is this the typical way that we in the West understand humanity? No. We go, pretty good person. Let me put it for you kind of this way. God has two categories. Righteous, unrighteous. Holy, unholy. Guess which one you fall into? Guess which one I fall into? Unholy, unrighteous. And we see in this text that we're looking at, you can go back one, Chase, that Jesus is the holy and righteous one. So, lest we think that like Jesus is kind of holy and righteous and we need to try to aspire to be that, and so God will love us and we'll be good, and if we would just obey, he'll be nice to us and be kind to us. Paul says, you got nothing. For those of us who would say, okay, but I need a do-over and then I can do it from the rest of the way. It's like, that's not true. And to think that we can do that is very prideful, right? Which is perhaps the root of all sin is our pride. So here's the big idea. God's demand is be righteous. God's diagnosis is no one is righteous. So God's deliverance is Jesus is your righteousness. I need you to understand this, that you don't have what it takes. I don't have what it takes. Before a holy, good, perfect, and just God, you stand there with your clothes soiled. You stand there reeking. I stand there reeking. We've got no hope other than someone else giving us their righteousness. No one is good. No, not one. The demand, you're created to and you're commanded to be righteous. As we see in Romans 3, no one is. But the gospel is the good news that Jesus is the holy and righteous one. I reminded you of Isaiah 53 earlier. It also says in this prophecy, it says that Jesus, my righteous one, this servant, will make many to be accounted righteous. The fact that we can be accounted righteous is the good news of the gospel. That though you and I have lived unrighteously, though by our own merit, our own works, we're unholy, we're unrighteous, we're in this category, because Jesus was righteous in our place, because Jesus lived without sin, because Jesus died to take away our sin, we are transferred from this category to the righteous category because Jesus' righteousness is accredited to us. Jesus is the holy and righteous one. Peter moved